The Bride is a cinematic rendition of an identity crisis. This Maggie Gyllenhaal directed film that does a unique take on Frankenstein and Mary Shelley, Frankenstein's author, mixes and matches genres, tones, themes, and even a firm basis in reality with a fast and loose disregard for conventional filmmaking wisdom. Because to be clear, there is no wisdom in this film. If anything, The Bride is just a no-holds-barred, disorganized disaster that would even make a chaos lesbian like myself go damn. And admittedly, this was by design. In an interview with IndieWire, Gyllenhaal dived into her intentions with The Bride and stated, "I'm not really interested in making a movie that fits clearly into one genre. We've had so many of those, Also, it was a language that was made by other people with a different experience than mine. And I feel like if I have very clear and specific intentions, why not use aspects of all the genres if they're useful to me? I think we're kind of in post-genre times." End quote. Gyllenhaal admittedly has some solid points. When creating something, you want it to be unique and distinctly identifiable as being a part of yourself. And I'm not speaking of all the medical debt we have accrued over the years, but rather a creation that reflects our interests, passions, worldview, and our various trials and turmoils. Something that just captures our unique perspective. I like the duck-billed platypus. Additionally, Gyllenhaal is somewhat correct in that genres are being mixed and matched and spliced together, and not even in just film, but in so many different artistic mediums and the respective genres within them, and how artists play around with them to the point that they often create something new and stylistically distinct. But with that being said though, when splicing together genres, that movie or any other type of work of art still needs to feel cohesive. The combination requires them to blend together seamlessly rather than haphazardly, lest these disparate elements replace harmony with fusion confusion. And that is what has unfortunately happened with The Bride. In fact, the film was part of a re-examination of Frankenstein, a feminist critique, the big dreams versus superficiality of the American film industry, and surrealist self-sincerity, which admittedly are all elements that could overlap with one another with better execution, but alas, that said better execution can't be found in The Bride. The only execution happening here is me dragging this movie behind the shed and blowing its brains out with a double barrel. The Bride's issues are numerous, but its story is a bad enough place to start as any. The plot follows Jessie Buckley's Ida, who, in an effort to escape from the confines of this movie, instantly dies. Spoiler alert, it happens at the beginning of the movie, lol. Killed by the ghost of Mary Shelley, yes really, it's a thing that happens, who drones an opening monologue about how there was a story that she wanted to tell after that of Frankenstein. Ida's body is eventually resurrected by Annette Bening's mad scientist Dr. Euphronius at the behest of Christian Bale's Frankenstein's monster, who has adopted the name Frankenstein as well as just going by the name of Frank.
That's Frankenstein.
Frank's rationale for this resurrection is that, by story tradition, he is lonely and desires a female companion.
So say we all!
And thus Ida's body is rejuvenated back to life, albeit somewhat scarred by the procedure, because she doesn't really remember her old self and has a personality that is also at war with herself as well. One that is part Ida, and the other part being Mary Shelley. Eventually some snafus occur, because you can't have a Frankenstein movie without angry mobs, legal and moral conundrums, and a monster and his wife monster who go on a Bonnie and Clyde style crime spree. Wait, that doesn't sound right. And from there, Frank and Ida, who is now called the Bride throughout the film, because she doesn't remember being Ida that much, sow mayhem across the United States and plot their future as they are on the run from law enforcement. The Bride just doesn't work. While the movie is brimming with interesting ideas, they don't really coalesce into something all that meaningful. For example, the phrase, "the Bride of Frankenstein," denotes Frankenstein's monster's ownership over his bride, a man's ownership over his soon-to-be wife, which is a phrase that's ripe for a feminist angle, which the bride provides by the fact that Frank lies. He lies about how he supposedly knew the bride before their death, and how they were once a doting couple back when she was fully alive. A life that, let me remind you, she doesn't remember. Which is admittedly relatable because I have ADHD and I can't remember shit. By itself, Frank lying to his bride in an effort to score some necrophiliac dead corpse nookie is a thought-provoking angle because that is an unflattering but all too truthful depiction of men. Which, to be clear, the act of lying to a woman in order to gain her favor and potentially score some sexual relations doesn't describe all men, but it describes enough to where it's concerning. You know, it kind of indicates a wider problem. But anyway, the point. The Bride features a unique approach for a Frankenstein story. But the problem, however, is that nearly every other aspect of the movie dilutes this said unique approach. Any poignancy falls flat when Buckley hams it up during the moments where her character's Mary Shelley persona takes hold, or in how the plotline involving Penelope Cruz's Myrna Malloy navigates the police beat as a woman under her boss and Peter Sarsgaard's Jack Wiles, and in how all of that is tonally a more sincere feminist detective plotline that unfortunately feels like a totally different movie compared to The Bride's more schlocky elements, because there be some schlock here, or when the movie attempts to invoke thoughtful feminist angles only to dumbify them with awful dialogue, most notably brain attack. Because I don't care what movie you are, the words brain attack are just dumb. You can have the most thoughtful speech in human history, but if you follow that up with brain attack over and over again, you kind of lose the meaning of the message because it's dumb. The film's more surrealist elements suffer for similar reasons. For example, like many of us, Frank uses the cinema as a form of escapism, opting to watch a musical over and over again that stars Jake Gyllenhaal's Ronnie Reed, where Frank imagines himself as being one of the dancers. Which, okay, that makes some sense. Most people like to see themselves being as cool or as talented as the people on the big screen, because it's just a thing that people do. I mean, I don't, but that's because I live my life like an action star, if that action star was actually Rick Moranis. But still, some people do. However, the execution of this idea just doesn't work, mostly because the film actually visually shows Frank in full Penguinstein regalia doing a little bit of the song and dance routine, and even though his moves aren't flashy compared to Jake Gyllenhaal's, though to be fair, no one's dance moves are ever as flashy as Jake Gyllenhaal's, it remains fucking hilarious, which is a problem because this moment is meant to be taken in sincerity, and yet I was laughing, because the dissonance between the scene's intent and the visuals were just so jarring. And that word, jarring, is an apt descriptor for what I felt whenever the movie went down the surrealist route as well. Like, there are breaks with reality intended to be comedic that are interspersed with more emotionally sincere scenes, and then there's one sequence where a party spontaneously breaks out into the best choreographed flash mob that the steampunk 1930s had ever seen. But this scene truly becomes bizarre when the dancing itself isn't just being imagined by Frank and the bride, but is instead presented as actually occurring in reality. And just no, that makes no sense in the context of the scene, or before the scene, or after the scene, or any part of the scene. All of the scene. Doesn't make any sense, does not compute. As I said, it's just really damn bizarre. Now let's discuss the bride's worst quality. That quality being in how it's so damn boring, which you'd think wouldn't be the case considering how, as the way I've described it in this review, The Bride is a disaster, and yet The Bride essentially books the audience a train ticket to Dullsville. The film's pacing is completely fucked like a millennial's credit score, and the movie haphazardly splices disparate genres together without much narrative cohesion, ensuring a tone that was all over the place. And all these conflicting elements, when combined with the issues I listed earlier in this review, create a dissatisfying cinematic experience, an often disjointed mess that denies the audience's ability to mentally lock in on the story or care about the characters, a disaster that constantly inspires lethargy rather than emotional investment, hence why it is boring. Because when it comes to The Bride, I demand an annulment.